testing. Third-party fabric testing for bulk production. In this section, we'll take a look at the rigorous testing done on our bulk productions. This is after all of our preliminary rounds of color testing and our sample yardage. These testings happen almost always on bulk productions to ensure that the final fabric going to make the final garments or products are of the right quality intended. There are many third-party fabric testing labs. Now, most mills have their own internal testing to determine if the quality of their product is close to meeting the standards necessary. Sometimes designers also have their own testing facilities to do their own in-house fabric testing. However, third-party independent fabric testing labs are very important. This is because a lot of money is involved when making the bulk product. If a problem is found internally by one party and not by the other, it is very hard to determine who is at fault or if monetary compensation should be granted. However, if the testing is done by a third and independent party, they do not care either way what happens with the fabric, so they can give an unbiased opinion as to the quality of the fabric. Therefore, if there is an issue with the fabric and it is noted by the independent fabric testing lab, that would be grounds for monetary compensation. So after the bulk production has been made, a few yards of fabric from the bulk production will be sent from the mill to a fabric testing lab. Again, the fabric testing lab is independent of the mill or the designer. Again, so they can give unbiased results as to the quality of the fabric. These labs specialize in testing fabric in several ways to determine the overall quality of the fabric. These labs ensure that the fabric being produced will meet the quality standards set by the mill and by the designer. When the mill and the designer are ready to begin the bulk production, contracts will be written up specifying what quality standards need to be met by the fabric. It is important that the mill meet these standards as they are now contractually obligated to meet them. Testing for strength. A number of tests will be performed to determine the strength of a fabric. These tests include the following: a tensile strength, shown on the right. This will test the amount of force a fabric can take before snapping. As we can see on the GIF on the right, this is a tensile strength test being performed on a strip of fabric. A strip of fabric is clamped into two clamps, one up here and one down here. They are slowly pulled apart from one another until it snaps. The force needed to snap the fabric is then recorded. There is also tearing strength. This tests the amount of force needed to tear a fabric. There is also a puncture resistance test. This tests how easily it is to poke through a piece of fabric. Here are some demonstrations of both of those final two tests. On the left, we see a test for tearing strength. It is very similar to our tensile strength test, except the fabric has been sliced in two partially. Half of the fabric will be clamped into this upper part here, and half clamped below. They will move apart until the fabric rips down onto this line. The amount of force necessary to rip down until the marked line will be recorded. On the right, we see testing for puncture resistance. Many work clothes boast that they are puncture resistant, which makes them durable and can hold up to heavy-duty workloads. We can see in the puncture resistance test a large cone-shaped metal piece is pressed down into a swatch of fabric that has been clamped down in this metal donut. The amount of force needed to puncture through a hole in the material is recorded. Next, we'll test for durability. Strength testing is a way to determine how strong the fabric is at the initial creation, which is different from durability, although they sound quite similar. Durability testing will determine how the fabric will hold up over time. Fabric durability is tested in some of the following ways. The first being an abrasion or pilling test. These test how a fabric will hold up to being rubbed over a long time. The GIF on the right shows an abrasion testing in action. Fabric has been mounted onto these little discs. The machine is turned on and little metal discs will rub in circular motions while also spilling. This recreates the rubbing and wear and tear of fabric over a long period of time in a short amount of time. After the test is done, the fabric is observed to see if it has pilled, worn away, or other damage has been incurred. We will also perform dimensional stability tests. This may be a number of different tests that all determine how well a fabric will keep its shape over time. This can involve a torque test, a shrinkage test, an elongation test, stretch and recovery test. I only have an image of the stretch and recovery on the next slide, so I'll briefly explain some of the other ones. The shrinkage test will wash the fabric and see if there has been any change in size of the fabric before and after the wash. Sometimes multiple washes will occur, and the difference in size before and after each wash will be recorded. The torque test will twist the fabric. Once the fabric has been twisted tightly, its ability to recover its shape will be recorded. Ideally, the twisting will not terribly warp, stretch, or disform the fabric in a significant way. Elongation is a little bit like the opposite of shrinkage. A number of different things will happen to the fabric, like washing or wear, stretching, so on, and we will see if the fabric gets any bigger than its initial size. Stretch and recovery will test a fabric's ability to stretch and then snap back to its original shape. Tests to determine the color fastness of a fabric will also be performed. If we remember from our prints and dyes, color fastness refers to the ability of a fabric to keep its color. We mean keep its color and brightness and vividness. This color fastness test, or these color fastness tests, will test how well fabric will maintain its color when subjected to washing, sweat, not real sweat, they have a chemical synthetic alternative, sunlight, and potentially other chemicals. The other chemicals will be determined by the nature of the garments to be made. For example, swimsuits may be subjected to seawater or pool water as part of their color fastness testing. It will also test to see if a fabric dye will easily bleed or rub off. This is known as crocking. On the left, we can see images of the results of a color fastness test. I'm not sure what this was exposed to, but probably sunlight. And we can see the bleaching that has occurred by the sunlight onto the fabric. This area labeled control has had no light, water, or chemicals subjected to it. It is the original color as intended by the designer. The discolored swatch down here shows how the color will change based on what has been applied to it, whether it be water, sunlight, sweat, pool water, seawater, whatever it may be, whatever the designer decides to test for. As we can see, these swatches have not performed well, especially the orange on the right. There is significant color damage and bleaching in the swatch as compared to the control. This is not a good sign. As part of our color tests too, as mentioned before, we will test for fabric crocking. Crocking is when fabric dye will rub or wash into other parts of the fabric or other things that come in contact with the fabric. If you've ever had a brightly dyed thing and you've put it in the wash, let's say a bright deep red, and you've put it in the wash with other things and then taken it out and everything else is, looks a bit pink, especially the whites that went into it. This is a sign of fabric crocking. That dye has washed out into the water and into other fabrics, either the fabric itself or other things that have been put into the wash with it. This doesn't happen as commonly as it used to, as America has instituted certain standards for color fastness. However, it can still happen, so be careful whenever you buy a new piece of fabric or new garment, especially one that is brightly or vividly colored. It is smart to wash it once alone. After that initial wash, most of the excess dye should have been released, and so it will be safe to wash with other garments. On the right, we can see a stretch and recovery test. A small piece of fabric is placed into between these two small clamps. Weights are then placed on a hook that pulls the bottom clamp away. We can see on the ruler how much the fabric has stretched. Once it has been stretched and we see how much it has been stretched, the weights will be removed and we can see if it snaps back into its original position, which would be a full recovery, which is ideal, or if it has been stretched out and will not recover to its initial shape, which is not ideal. There is also special properties testing. Many garments need to perform in specific ways, as we have discussed. The fabric that they are made out of will need to have special properties to be able to achieve technical goals. Fabric will be tested in special ways depending on what they need to do. For example, things like waterproofing might be tested for rain garments, or heat insulation may be tested for outdoor clothing made for cold weather. It is very important that these technical garments perform in the ways that they are supposed to. Highly technical garments may need very specialized testing to ensure they will do their job. For example, medical garments will be tested for their resistance to blood penetration or microbial penetration. Garments made to protect firefighters will need to be tested for thermal insulation as well as flame resistance. On the right, we can see a piece of fabric being tested for flammability. In America, fabrics need to have a certain level of inflammability. It can be very unsafe for fabric to be incredibly flammable, as they become a fire hazard. This is particularly so for bedding. In the image, we can see a piece of fabric that has been laid down at a 45-degree angle on a metal plate. A small flame is then applied. We can see the flame travel upwards to the top of the plate. At the top of the plate, you may see this small string. It holds a weight. What we are testing for to determine the level of flammability is how long it takes for the flame to travel up the piece of fabric and burn through the piece of string, resulting in the drop of the weight. The longer it takes for the flame to travel up the fabric, the more flame resistant it is. If it travels up very, very quickly, it is a highly flammable fabric. This is a piece of cotton, which by nature is quite flammable. Chemical testing will also be done. Fabric testing labs can also test the chemical makeup of fabric to determine many different things. Fabric labs can perform tests to determine the exact fiber makeup of the fabric to ensure it matches what the mill has promised it would be. For instance, if a mill has promised to use 100% cotton in their fabric, that's what you want. If the fabric lab detects the presence of polyester or other synthetic fibers, this would be very bad for the mill, as it has contractually promised to provide 100% cotton clothing or fabric. Fabric labs can also perform tests to determine if chemicals were or were not used in the making, dyeing, or finishing of the fabric. Fabric labs can determine if banned dye substances, formaldehyde, or heavy metals are present in the fabric. These are all different types of chemicals that would not be wanted in the final fabric. Also, if a lab has promised to finish using a specific chemical finish, the fabric labs can determine if that chemical finish has been done by the chemical testing. It is important to determine the chemicals used in fabric, as many of them can be harmful to human health, such as heavy metals or formaldehyde. Others can be destructive to the environments when they break down. Many countries have bans on these chemicals, so selling any products made from fabrics containing these chemicals would be illegal, certainly in the USA and Canada, but in most other developed nations as well. Textile quality and composition is regulated by world governments, as mentioned in the last slide. These are just the standards and regulations for the European Union, as well as the USA and Canada. However, many other countries have their own standards and regulations as well. I will not go through them all, but take a minute to take a look at them. They govern many different properties of the fabric and require textile mills and manufacturers utilizing those textiles to adhere to certain standards of quality for different measures. As you can see at the beginning of the USA and Canada textile standards and regulation, there are a lot of different regulations pertaining to color fastness and crocking. These are more new, so if you've never experienced that occasion where you threw in some brightly colored garment into your washing machine and had all of your other clothing a bit tainted by it, let's say, coming out a tint close to that color, that is because of these new standards and regulations. It used to be a quite common event. However, with the new standards and regulation, the color fastness and crocking properties of fabrics sold in the marketplace has greatly improved. We do not have to worry about it so much anymore and can wash our clothes a little bit easier. Many of these other regulations don't have to do simply with consumer quality, but also have to do with environmental and health regulations. Some of them ban certain types of chemicals. As you can also see on the right, there are many governing the flammability allowance of different clothing. This has come about with the advent of synthetic fibers. As we learned, synthetic fibers are incredibly flammable and require, many times, additional finishing to make them not so flammable, as their high level of flammability is quite dangerous. If a piece of synthetic cloth or clothing that someone is wearing somehow touches an open flame, it can be quite dangerous if that fabric or garment basically catches fire all over in a very short amount of time. So what happens if fabric doesn't pass the test? We've gone through all these different measures, and of course, when a bulk order is placed, as we discussed, specific standards of quality that need to be met by the finished fabric will be agreed upon by the designer and by the mill. These quality standards will be included into the contract for the bulk order. The quality standards must, at a minimum, meet the legally required standards as set out by the regulation and standards laws viewed on the previous slide. However, designers may have their own quality standards that need to be met, especially for very highly technical garments. If a brand makes their name making clothing that says it will keep you warm and dry, the fabric needs to be able to do that. Allowing substandard fabric that doesn't meet the testing needs for insulation or waterproofing could damage that brand's reputation for quality clothing. So, if the fabric in a bulk order is found to fail or not meet these standards of quality by the independent tester, a few things can happen. If the garments or products made from this fabric are intended for a general use and do not need to fulfill important technical duties, and the brand isn't so much a stickler for quality in their goods, the brand will typically negotiate a discount on the fabric with the mill. This is an instance where the fabric may fail a designer's quality standards, but not the legal ones. I'm not going to say that every brand always ensures that their fabric meets the legal standards. We hope they will, and of course if they are caught using substandard quality fabrics that don't meet government regulations, they will receive fines and of course bad reputation. However, if the fabrics are simply not meeting the brand standards agreed upon in the contract, it is very common to negotiate a discount on the fabric. The mill will apply the discount to the bulk order, and the substandard quality fabric will head off to the garment factory and be made into clothing and products. Now, you may think that this only happens in the cheapest of quality brands, but that's not quite so true. Most brands have a very tight timetable. They come out with collections on a rigorously strict schedule. and they have made contracts with retailers potentially all over the world. Those contracts have delivery dates for their final goods. If they do not meet those delivery dates, then all of their clothing will be subject to be discounted towards the retailer. For example, say I'm a large brand and I have promised that my clothing or my new collection will be in your stores, whether it be Macy's or another retailer, on July 1st, 2020 something. Well, it had better be there. If it's not there, well, the money for your order could be refunded. So the money that the retailer has paid for those garments may be refunded, or a penalty will be ensued for lateness. This can add up, causing a lot of monetary problems for a brand. So a brand, even a potentially good quality brand, may simply use the substandard fabric and ship it straight away to garment production without correcting the problem and without making a new bulk order. This is because it takes a long time to make a bulk order. They have already allotted the time for one bulk production to be made, but most schedules do not allow the time for 2 bulk productions to be made. So very often, these garments will be made from substandard quality fabrics. It happens a lot, and with brands you might not think would accept substandard quality fabric, and it's all just to maintain their delivery schedules. However, if the garments and products made from the fabric will be used in very specialized areas where their performance is very important, say firefighters and protective gear, the fabric will need to be remade and retested until it can pass all the required testing. This will usually be done at the mill's expense, as they were not able to meet the agreed upon standards in the first place. This concludes our lesson for today and this week on the quality control. Hopefully you've learned a little bit more about how we can control and assure the quality of the fabric produced for our garments and our products.